Good afternoon and welcome to all who are joining us live today and to those who will watch this recording at a later date. Welcome. My name is Nicole Stokes and I'm the Associate Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and a University Professor of Sociology at St. Joseph's University. Thank you for joining us today. A key element of our university mission is the commitment to lifelong learning. And this mission led to the creation of the series that you've joined today, the Unlimited Learning Series, and today's discussion that's co-sponsored by the SJU Center for Inclusion and Diversity. I would like to share with you why this conversation is so impactful and so important to me and our work, collective work of DEI at St. Joseph's University. We recognize that the work of diversity, equity, and inclusive excellence is all of our work at SJU. It's at the heart of all that we do, and it's at the heart of our Jesuit values. These values guide us in our shared goals of creating and maintaining an atmosphere of inclusive excellence that celebrates our diverse backgrounds, beliefs, and perspectives. We will accomplish our mission through educational programming and campus community partnerships and opportunities like this for extensive dialogue and conversation. Specifically, we emphasize cura personalis, care for the whole person. And this concept allows us to think about our differences in the context that everyone should thrive in a learning environment that's characterized by mutual respect and our collective pursuit of social justice. We also acknowledge that the knowledge and scholarship, why we're all here as part of the academy, should be used to engage in civil discourse and for forming a lifelong habit of engaged citizenship and continued learning and development. We are really encouraged by the over 100 people that registered for today's event and for the surrounding community members who have joined us today for this important conversation. You are bigger than you think, the value of togetherness. In this conversation, we will explore how our personal and professional experiences shape our ability to be empathetic, our need to belong, and our willingness to be a champion for the communities where we live and work. In anticipation of today's program, we received several questions in advance from our registrants that will be answered by our panelists. We also invite you, the live audience, enter questions that you think of in response to the conversation in the Q&A feature in this Zoom webinar. The first part of our program will feature a keynote presentation, and the second part of our program will be a conversation, and I hope you all will join in that conversation. The conversation about our personal and shared responsibility to engage and to connect with the work of inclusive excellence and greater equity for all who we encounter in our workplaces and all we encounter in our communities. And I'm delighted to introduce our two panelists. First, our discussant, Christian Furler O'Brien, who is our alum, SJU class of 2013. He will join us as the co-facilitator for today's conversation. Christian believes that the power of difference can be transformational. Everyone deserves to be celebrated for being true to themselves, and everyone should be empowered to thrive in the skin they're in. Since graduating from SJU, Christian has applied his studies from the pharmaceutical and healthcare marketing program to a dynamic and successful career spanning professional sales, sales training, and consumer healthcare marketing. He currently serves as the senior training manager for the U.S. Oncology Sales Organization at Bristol Myers Squibb, a leading global biopharmaceutical company. Cultivating equity and inclusion for LGBTQ people and their allies so that they can feel empowered to be their most authentic selves has been the cornerstone of his career. Having launched an employee resource group in 2015 for LGBTQ+ individuals and their allies, he has helped to cultivate a spirit of inclusion and programs dedicated to support LGBTQ+ individuals. His proudest achievement includes earning the recognition of the best place to work for LGBT equality from the Human Rights Campaign and securing transition medical benefits for transgender employees so that they may thrive authentically. At Bristol Myers Squibb, he leads the global programming for Pride Heritage Month and National Coming Out Day. Christian continues to give back to Hawk Hill in many ways. In 2020, he was selected as the co-chair for the newly launched Diverse Alumni Council as part of the National Alumni Board. Through courageous conversations, embracing diversity and celebrating the whole person, he helped to activate our diversity-focused crowdfunding initiative for the SJU Day of Giving in March of 2021. In that one day, we raised over $22,000 for DEI Strategic Innovation Fund and our DEI Ready to Launch Fund. The funds raised directly impact the lives of our students and underrepresented and diverse groups in our campus community, supporting programming through the Center for Inclusion and Diversity, that students will receive the guidance and career planning to support their successful launch into their careers upon graduation. Christian currently lives in New York City with his husband, Robert, and is looking forward to continuing his education as he pursues his MBA in marketing in Hofstra University in the spring of 2022. Congratulations. It is also my pleasure, and I'm beyond thrilled to introduce today's keynote speaker. Ms. Tiffany Tavarez serves as the Senior Vice President of Community Sponsorships and Strategy for Wells Fargo Advisors. In this newly created national role, Tiffany is responsible for building a strategic framework that maximizes community impact, strengthens relationships with Wells Fargo advisors, clients, and external stakeholders, and aligns the company's national philanthropic goals. Prior to this role, she served as Vice President of Community Relations at Wells Fargo, where she implemented the company's corporate responsibility priorities within the social impact and sustainability team in the Northeast region. Her career in strategic philanthropy, program development, and stakeholder engagement has included reputable organizations such as PICO and Exelon Company, Comcast, Temple University, and the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage. Numerous organizations throughout the greater Philadelphia region have recognized her work and commitment to civic engagement and impacting, including the Forum of Executive Women, Philadelphia City Council, Leadership Philadelphia, Impacto, Friends of the Urban Affairs Coalition, and the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey. Most recently, she was named in the Philadelphia Business Journal Top 40 Under 40 and a Woman of Excellence honoree by WDAS 105.3 FM. She also serves as executive sponsor of the Wells Fargo, Pennsylvania, Delaware Green Team, an internal volunteer focus group dedicated to helping Wells Fargo promote environmental awareness at work. Her civic engagements include serving as a commissioner for the Pennsylvania Commission for Women, board of directors, Monument Lab, member of the board of directors for Esperanza, and the Poverty Action Fund. She is a first-generation college graduate who has earned degrees from both Temple University and the University of the Arts. Beyond all of these notable, esteemed accomplishments that I just read, Tiffany is one of the most generous, kind humans I know. She is brilliant, she is beautiful inside and out, and I'm so grateful that you continue to say yes to all of my asks. I am delighted to turn the program over to you, Ms. Tiffany Tavarez. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I need you for all introductions. Are you available, Dr. Stokes? I mean, that's ridiculous. So good afternoon and happy November. I have to say out loud, it is November because my brain and my body are in denial that that isn't the case. So first, Dr. Stokes, I have to thank you. I want to acknowledge you. Again, you pointed out the fact that you excitedly invited me here and I, of course, excitedly accepted. I'm very grateful for you and your incredible team and this opportunity. And as I promised, I'm going to let the audience know, please direct all claims of love and complaint to her following the program. In addition, I'm really looking forward to my conversation with Christian. I mean, SJU should be super grateful and super honored to have such an energetic, successful, thoughtful, engaging leader like him as part of your alumni community. And again, I want to thank the advancement team that's been part of this. Of course, IT, you always need IT. Just thank you all for your support, your time, your partnership, and expertise with this event. So I want to share a story. There was a woman, she was about 24 years old when she lost her husband to gun violence. She had two small kids that she needed to care for, so she worked multiple jobs to keep them afloat. She moved them around in hopes of a better home, in a better neighborhood, so her children could eventually attend a better school. They had to take advantage of local food banks, right? They got the free turkeys, on those block parties, et cetera, during Thanksgiving. They signed up for all these free services that local business provided, on those community days, et cetera. They took advantage of getting those free backpacks and free school supplies at the local library. So her kids had new things, some things to call their own, where they go to school. And when they got there, they'd run to the cafeteria, pick up their free breakfast. And in between her jobs, on top of all of that, she would find time to get treatment for the cancer that was eating her body. And along her journey, she lost more family, more friends to either arrest, addiction, and violence, including her own father. But most of all, she lost many more to hopelessness. And the abundance of free that she and her family had to take advantage of never added up to all the things it cost her. To be kind of corny here, she had never graduated high school, but I always like to tell her, hey, you earned a Ph.D. in the School of Hard Knocks and graduated magna cum laude. That's why I am so proud of my mother, right? Because of her journey, our journey, she taught me that no matter what role you are in, you are always in a role of service. It is up to you whether or not you accept that role. It is up to you whether or not you accept that variables in your life that you cannot control, such as your race, your gender, your ethnicity, your sexuality, your religion, your zip code, your complexion, your citizenship status, and income, be a constant indicator of how well you will do in this life, and above all, how long you will get to live it. My mother inherently knew that sometimes the change we strive for, the change we want, will be gifted to us through our children, through our neighbors' children. Much of the work we do takes more than a lifetime. Our inability to fully acknowledge the inequity in our problems will always cultivate further inequity in our solutions to address them. It is why we have to be as sophisticated as the systems we want to change. And sophistication is an art form. It requires you know yourself so well that it makes other people question how much they bring their real, authentic selves to work every day. So I'm here to share, as I have so far, with honesty and sometimes, ridiculous candor, the stories that have shaped me into who I am. So that provides context as to what I do, and more importantly, and above all, how I do it. My goal is to remind you to choose chronic self-conviction over chronic self-doubt, because no company, no organization, not even a great unlimited learning series, no shade, Dr. Stokes, can help you identify and honor your value or control your narrative. Because the sooner you take ownership of the culture you cultivate, whether or not it's the culture you need to expand your sense of belonging, the sooner you can get to identifying yourself as a lobbyist and not a hobbyist of real diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now I want to take a moment to show you one of my favorite photos on the next slide here. I just love this photo so much. So some of my greatest memories of togetherness was in the midst of meeting strangers while traveling solo. And this is probably going to be the most cliche message of the afternoon, but it's true, right? This is how I've learned that arriving at my destination is only half of my journey. I'm sorry I did that, but it was very imperative that I did. I'm really grateful to the people that have treated me like family along the way, right? They remind me that you don't need permanent families to heal or scheduled plans to rest. I will always choose to carry those memories with me because they weigh more than any burden someone can put on me. So I was in Berlin in June of 2019. I went for about a week by myself. I love Ethiopian. Well, first, actually, let me go back. I love food. I love Ethiopian food as one of the foods. And when I noticed my Uber driver from the airport had a small Ethiopian flag hanging on his rearview mirror, I asked, for him to tell me, hey, where can I go for some delicious like yemesir, alicha, or doro tips, right? Two of my favorite dishes. So we almost literally had a car accident because he was not expecting that to come out of my mouth, but once he kind of pulled it together, he kind of proudly told me about this Ethiopian community that lived about 35 minutes or so outside of downtown Berlin. So I looked up the restaurant, just random restaurant. I went there by myself, partially, of course, getting lost on foot as I usually do before I found my way. I immediately befriended these three beautiful muses you see on your screen. So, to your left in the photo is Genet, which means like heaven or paradise. She's one of the kindest women I've ever met. Her curiosity of why a curly-haired woman from Philadelphia randomly walked into a restaurant and started asking questions bothered her because, as she had told me, hey, I am the one that asks the questions around here. On the far right is Hayat. If I remember that correctly, it means life. She spoke the least, but laughed the most. Everyone needs someone like that in their lives. And her laugh was indeed full of like a lot of life. And then last but not least was Yemesrash, which means good news, and that she brought me every time. She turned away every time we actually took a photo. So this is actually a good shot. So she and I still keep in touch, and I consider her a dear friend. So anyway, after sitting at this cafe for about 4 hours, talking about all things life, she invited me to meet her family the following day at a local bakery where she worked. I mean, hello, I told you I love food. So this was like truly heaven for me. It was the first time I actually had homemade Ethiopian food. I was in fact in paradise, and apparently in paradise, you can easily gain an additional 7 pounds in like 48 hours. I promise you I've done the research. I actually tell her when I'm doing a presentation that includes this photo. And I remember the first time I did that, of course she was hesitant, but then she was like, no, it's okay, it's fine. And of course, I naturally asked her about the word togetherness, right? And what was it like to spend time that day with a stranger? And she said to me, if you declare yourself a stranger to someone before they have a chance to say hello, you will always be a stranger even when they do. That knocked the wind out of me the first time I heard it. And it's still almost like, gets me choked up when I think about it now. Of course, we always thank each other for being open and willing to engage in something with someone that was unfamiliar when we think about that day, because that feeling is always temporary. I have so many stories like this and have come to the conclusion that togetherness cannot happen without openness, right? And openness cannot happen without full acceptance of who you are, including everything and everyone, no matter how painful that brought you to this point. Because if you do not accept yourself, you've limited the capacity in which you can accept others. And this gets me thinking, organizations talk about a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion every day, all day, especially right now, when those who have been awakened to injustice, to racism or sexism, in the last few years, decide right now, to be quite honest, are riding this wave of woke. These are the people who will reiterate mission statements about DEI in open forums and email signatures and public remarks on their websites. They'll provide you with a ton of links, videos, well-curated photos. There's no shortage of organizational commitments, plans, and visions for diversity, equity, inclusion. I don't doubt that for many of these organizations, it is real, it is tangible, and sometimes it's authentic. The challenge I have is that the individual and the employees, those who are leaders and those who are perceived leaders, don't always transfer the message of their organizational commitment to their individual actions. They speak as if DEI is a cause to rally around, and DEI is not an opportunity for emotional or spiritual charity. It is a personal commitment to advocate for the best version of yourself. It is a mental commitment to empathy. It is a test to see how you will react when you learn that compassion costs emotional currency by those who place value on looking the other way. It is a physical commitment to using your voice as much as you use your discomfort to excuse yourself for calling out people who take pride in being an oppressor. The longing of social and economic privilege does not outweigh the unspoken obligation morally attached to you once you've actually earned it. And in this next slide, I want to highlight a little bit, about what people say and what people think. People often ask me, oh, Tiffany, just in panels like this, what are your leadership values? What do you think makes a good leader? And of course, I don't think there's one answer for any one of these questions. But when it comes to words and how powerful they can be, that's what gets me so moved, inspired, excited. It can also be the thing that fundamentally boils my blood. How we operate as leaders runs parallel to how we bring those words to life. To give meaning to what we say runs parallel to how we think about its context. There's zero science behind this, right? But just in my experience, I have found that most women, especially women who don't identify as a majority in their respective spaces, don't speak to themselves with much kindness or understanding. Oftentimes, women start from a place of deficit, of less than, of not enough. If you speak unkindly to yourself and speak from a place of deficit, lacking that kindness, how would I expect you to speak to others who aren't your friends, or come from the place that you come from, or even look like you, right? How are we supposed to strengthen all these teams and, whether it be supporting project leads or adhering to even a deadline if you aren't a good friend to yourself? There is no incentive for me to trust that. And yet We expect those who define our diversity, equity, inclusion missions to keep their word. And we can no longer afford to hold those in power to a higher standard than we're willing to meet simply because we feel powerless. On this next slide, you'll see actually one of my favorite quotes on the planet. I just adore it so much. You know, I love when this happens, but like when you read something, it moves you, like reminds you of how alive I am. I remember reading this. I was like, okay, Sammy, my little mic dropper. I gotta look into this guy. This is great. So the quote, words are the clothes thoughts wear. With this quote, I charge you to think about what words matter to you, right? And think about how you speak to people. Those are the words that define you as a leader. All of the affinities you represent, occupationally, spiritually, culturally, those are the vehicles in which you let people know what those words mean to you and what you think of them. So here's a small sample of some of the, I like to call them verbal bombs that have been dropped in my career. Speaking of words, I've heard Latinas make the best secretaries. Everybody knows that. Or is your hair real? I mean, even if it is, it's too distracting. You got to do something with it. You would look nice if you straightened it. Or you shake hands like a man. I thought women were supposed to be delicate. Or are you going to beat me up now? I know where you're from. You guys are really angry. So, you know, my personal favorite, what are you exactly? I mean, I know you say you're American, but you're not like really American. Or why do you work so hard? Like just get married to one of these well-paid men and call it a day. You shouldn't be so visible all of the time. It just looks like you don't care or work, with teams really well. Because you're bigger than most of the women here, you should speak less so you don't seem so intimidating. Or you don't seem very maternal, which is probably why you're good at your job. And finally, one that actually happened in the last couple of years, you probably got hired because they needed a cute, diverse face to send to events. With that last one in particular, I actually told this man it was offensive for two reasons. Number one, I'm gorgeous. I am not cute. The least you can do is get it right, okay? The second, I said, the only reason you are concerned about what events my face is showing up in is because you're really hurt that yours was not invited. So needless to say, he never said anything crazy like that to me again. So point is, my quick replies and ongoing expectations of these statements doesn't refute the mental exhaustion it causes me. It is worse than a war. It is psychological terrorism, meant to not just hurt, but to systemically break down the person I have worked very hard to become. All of these incidents indicate that aggressors will try to bully their way into cultures that make them uncomfortable by trying to oppress you, reminding you that you are less than. Especially for those who identify as women or people of color, it's easy for us to revert into that state of mind, right? Look at our history. It is showcased in our titles, in our policies, our laws, in our paychecks. We walk around with a toolbox ready to fix whenever someone breaks, but never pay attention to what will fix us when we do. And when this happens to you or a colleague and you stay silent, you are complicit in the behavior that got you there. Leadership is not leadership unless it is inclusive and resilient to silence. With this particular quote in mind and the experience I've shared thus far, I want to tell you what I wear every day in some form in my head, on my heart on this next slide. Those words for me are curiosity, acceptance, respect, and endeavor. These are the words that articulate my passion and my purpose and the spaces I occupy. These are the words I want to build a culture on so that those who work with me understand what is important to the company that hired me, i.e. Wells Fargo Advisors, as you heard, as well as a company that holds all of my investment. That is Tiffany Tavarez Incorporated. If we don't hold ourselves accountable for what we say, for what words we choose, then we'll never hold ourselves accountable for how we act, how we treat others, all the cultures that we create. Companies aren't just looking for individuals to fulfill titles. They are seeking small companies, one-person companies who have identified their value, their mission, and who they seek to serve, and more importantly, what their investment is in order to influence the ecosystems that their brand relies on. I'll share a story. As you can tell, I love stories. I used to work at a major foundation early in my career. I was probably 22 or so. I was responsible for the grant application intake, creating, like all the packets for all of our panelists to review that we had invited. We were in this large boardroom, long table, director of the program sitting at the end of the table. there was some interesting conversation around these two particular potential grantees. One was a major, very established arts organization in the region. They had a generous budget and regularly provided arts and culture education and programming to their constituency. It was evident that whether or not we provided the grant, the program they were proposing was still going to happen. The other applicant was a very small neighborhood-based organization that was a staple of that community, a community that was more than underserved. They were just underreached by other collaborative partners. If they did not get this grant, that program that they proposed, it just wouldn't happen. That wasn't possible for them. It just wasn't in their capacity. And their audience in turn obviously would not be served. So in my opinion, again, early in my career, they were comparing apples and oranges, but I was just there to be quiet, listen, keep my head down, take notes. There was a panelist who was advocating for the smaller neighborhood organization. He talked about access and how where this neighborhood is located, the majority of students in the area were attending Title I schools. So for those of you who don't know, Title I schools enables a school to get federal funding to help support the students get academic achievement and to reach academic achievement. The reason being, I think it's supposed to be like 40% or more of the student population come from very low income families. So that's what a Title I school means. So the director at the head of the table, my boss at the time, was advocating for the other organization. Her reasoning, and I quote, I'll never forget this, if we don't fund the other group, it doesn't matter. They'd never know what they're missing anyway. It would probably be a waste. And again, they go back and forth. And at one moment, I hear her say, I guess you're right. It could be worthwhile for those kids to have access to the program if we fund it. Not all kids who come from poor schools turn out that bad. I suppose there's potential for them, to make something of themselves. As mentioned, I had, my head down the whole time because I'm supposed to be taking notes and kind of recording what was happening. But then I noticed the room was really quiet, and that energy when you feel like everyone's staring at you. And I kind of had my head down and I slowly looked up and I realized oh, everyone's staring at me. And my director is pointing at me. And then with all those variables of information, I was thinking, oh, she was referring to me. She was referring to me. It was debilitating. I was silent and I was complicit in the behavior and the experience that I had. But at the time, I was just trying to keep my job, right? Keep my head down. It was the first time, and please note, the last time I ever gave anyone power to make me feel less than, make me feel bad about what I did and did not have access to in my narrative. It was the moment I realized I didn't own my value. And that is why someone else was able to determine my worth for an audience at that moment. And I fixed it before it cost me. So in this next slide here, I want to start to kind of bring us a little bit to a close of the last few minutes. And of course, I hope we've got, checking the time here, we've got a little bit more time for another story that's really important in my life that I wanted to share. So I was in the 3rd grade when I got kicked out of art class. And yes, getting kicked out of art class is possible in the 3rd grade, hence this story. It was Sister Frances. She gave us one sheet of paper once a week for, and I say art class loosely, it was kind of a free period and you kind of get to do whatever you like. So I remember I messed up my drawing and I wasn't allowed to have another sheet of paper. And you know how, especially, little kids get, they get very upset. They take failure very personally. And that's what I did. It became like the art Olympics for me. I went home that night and I practiced every day. So when I got that sheet again the following week, I'd be ready. I got really hyped up actually. So anyway, next week comes, the sheet's in front of me. I got my crayons lined up, I got my one sheet of paper and I was stretching. I'm all right, it's go time. It was beautiful. A big flowering tree coming up from the grass with a fence along the left side. Along the right side is a very happy dog. He's running across, and in the sky, I drew a bright, big sun. And catch this. So I thought I was being super tongue in cheek here. the son was wearing sunglasses because that's how bright the sun was. I was like, oh, magnifique, I am a genius. So as a third grader, right, that was the big kicker for me. The son had to wear sunglasses. I was like, oh, again, masterpiece. So anyway, Sister Frances stands next to me and she says, what is this atrocity? Again, very similar way. I had my head down. I was coloring away. I never looked up to see her expression. As I'm coloring, I start saying, Sister Frances, can you believe I did this atrocity? And I start like singing. I was like, this is my atrocity. This is my atrocity. I'm like, whoa, this is my atrocity. Again, I never looked up at her face. So here's the thing. Third graders don't know what the word atrocity means, right? Newsflash, or at least I didn't. All I know is that the only time I heard big words is when someone was impressed or someone's in trouble. And I was looking at my picture. I was like, okay, she's clearly impressed. There's no way I'm in trouble. But I actually looked up at her and I quickly realized, oh, I think I'm in trouble. I think I'm in trouble. So here's the thing about my drawing I didn't tell you. My creativity for me is the way in which I used to color. The grass, it was blue. You know, I think the dog was like purple, and the tree was definitely pink. So all of a sudden she screams at the top of her lungs. The class became very still and silent. And she screams, what is this atrocity? Miss Tiffany, how dare you do this to God's creations? God did not make things to look like this. It's a natural, you know, she's going off. And without hesitation, and I guess now that I'm thinking about it, kind of cut her off. I shouted, but God isn't drawing the picture. To which she replies, the audacity. So she grabs me by the collar and starts pushing me, right? In the front, from the back of the classroom, essentially to the door. And as she's doing that, I'm trying to get everyone's attention in the class. And it's kind of hard, you know, obviously this is a virtual environment. I start saying, but God gave us the talent, right? I mean, you know, God made trees and God made the color pink and God makes audacity. Again, I had no idea what that was, but I knew I had a point to prove. I had never gotten in trouble and learned a new vocabulary in a very engaging way since. Anyway, down the hall, I continued. I was screaming, God gave me talent and I'm just trying to use it. God gave me talent, I'm just trying to use it. As you can imagine, I was not welcomed in that class again. But there is one image that stuck with me. It wasn't my drawing, as masterful as it was. It wasn't Sister Frances. It was my class. Every single child had their head down. No one looked up in either agreement or in judgment. It was the first time I witnessed fear giving birth to indifference. I kept thinking, why isn't anyone looking up? Why isn't anyone seeing to me? I even questioned whether or not that moment was happening to me. I find it no coincidence that so many people, you know, took time off of their very busy day to be in this lovely Zoom room with me, you know, during this awesome Unlimited series. And I'm a part of it before you, at least virtually with you. And you see me, you do see me. This is really happening. And gatherings like this help us center the pillars of my company, the company that is Tiffany Tavarez Incorporated, and the company at times that I keep. Unfortunately, those who replace curiosity with apathy or imagination with entitlement or vision with ability are the ones who tend to confuse the two. And that is why you need intentionality when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion to ensure you, as the individual coming in contact with your organization, does not. Our words and our actions is what hinders or helps public spaces and private lives. It is how a collaborative process decides to live or die in the name of inclusion, right? And consequences are often spoke of in terms of what we get wrong, right? What we miss, what we leave to die, including relationships, ideas, and results, right? There was a consequence to me not knowing the word atrocity, for instance. Instead, we have the power to change the narrative of that little word. Loyalty is a consequence of leadership. Empathy is a consequence of compassion, and creativity is a consequence of freedom. And those are the consequences I am okay with. Those are the consequences I am willing to sacrifice for. A fraction of my identity is due to my privileged title of Senior Vice President of Community Sponsorships and Strategy at Fargo Advisors. It's a role I'm very honored to have. And as a woman of color, as an American citizen, an ally of the LGBTQ community, as my mother's daughter, as a lover of rescue dogs, world traveler, mentor, mentee, a tequila lover, cupcake consumer, as an artist, as a creative, as my neighbor's caretaker, as a SEPTA bus rider, as a New Yorker who chose Philadelphia to be home, all of those things. It is a culmination of my identity that sparks my will to audaciously invest in the very solutions that battle our communal atrocities, because that to me is what true advocacy is. The fine balance of faith and audacious investment against what we find to be atrocious. That is the beauty of all of our work, and yet the burden of all of our purpose, because investing socially and financially in the very solutions against our personal and professional battles rests in between the tight space, right, of clarity and insanity. And let's be clear, in order to do this work, diversity, equity, inclusion work, philanthropy, volunteering, etc., the work around ensuring everyone has a sense of belonging and has access to equitable opportunity is in fact crazy. But the ones who are crazy enough, as we know, to think they can change the world are oftentimes the ones who usually do. So please remember, you are always bigger than you think. Your job is to embrace it. And most of all, we appreciate you for looking up. And I want to be sure that we move to the next slide so you can see who else appreciates you. That's me. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it on right to Christian and Nicole.
Oh my goodness. If there was a physical microphone, you just dropped it. And I'm sure not only did you unlock my heart and mind, but there's not a doubt in my soul that you unlocked others with what you shared. A couple of things that really stuck out to me, Tiffany, from what you shared: choose chronic self-conviction over chronic self-doubt. Cultivate that community that you seek, that togetherness. It all starts with you. And I hope for everybody that had the pleasure of tuning in today that you took away something really meaningful. Tiffany, I love the stories that you wove throughout your entire engagement today, because it really starts with knowing what your company's mission, value statement, and what currency you value, how that's going to impact not only the company you seek, but also the company that you carry with you in your professional journey. So for those of us who are joining us, we have a couple of housekeeping reminders. I'm going to start with some Q&A questions that have already come in ahead of schedule, but I really encourage you, navigate to the bottom panel of the screen. You'll notice a Q&A text box. Feel free to utilize that to ask questions. I'm going to be moderating this. But Tiffany, the first question is really around the concept of allyship. Throughout your discussion today and throughout the stories that you shared, you spoke about how knowing oneself really over time allowed you to develop a voice where you can take inventory of some of the microaggressions or some of the things that really aren't kosher being said around you in your ecosystem. So a lot of folks who tuned in may not really know where to start, despite some of their leaning towards wanting to support D&I initiatives. How do you think one person can affect positive change? Is there a particular tip or anything that you would advise people to start to lean into?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Christian. Also, I have to give your Christmas tree a shout out. I know we talked a little bit about it before we started.
Right.
It was amazing. All right. And also I'm panicking a little bit because I have a hard time, like I said, embracing the fact that it's November and you're just very
right. Yeah, we've been holding it down since early fall. So this is a little extra even for my liking, but my husband and I love Christmas. So why not get a jump start? Yeah.
That's right. I love it. I love it. So no, that's a great question. And it's an overwhelming one, right? So how can I put this? You can't expect professional outcomes of something that has no personal value to you, right? And so what I mean by that, I'm going to give you a very specific example. I try to give specific examples when possible to just, again, provide that context. Oftentimes, especially in the last couple of years, there have been a ton of, let's say, nonprofit leaders that have reached out to say, hey, would you be willing to sit on my board, or can you refer, someone to sit on the board because we need more diversity in our board? Oftentimes I'll have a relationship with the nonprofit partners and I'm like, actually, your board has needed diversity for a very long time. So thank you. And so what they did was reached out to, the handful oftentimes of who they consider diverse people, and that term can be very problematic, but I'm just going to go with it, to do that. And I remember one particular director who was actually quite aggressive. I had to, talk to him, and I said, I know this is going to sound strange, but who of your friends is not like you? Like, well, what do you mean? I said, okay, how do you identify? It's like, oh, I'm a white male. I'm, 62. I'm like, okay, who that's not family is not a white male that's in their 60s? I'm like, oh, well, and he, kept referring to people he worked with, or like I said, someone in his family. And I said, okay, if you don't have friends that are different from you, people, whether it be if you go to church, right, in your congregation, people that you've befriended, mentees or mentors, et cetera. I said, if you don't have those relationships personally, then why would you expect a benefit professionally? So oftentimes I'd say, I know this is very basic for some people, but allyship just means getting to know people and actually knowing them personally.
Yeah.
And so I think diversifying your people portfolio and making sure that your life and the people that are in it are actually reflective of the people that you say you advocate for, because you can't advocate for folks. I'm not saying that you can't advocate, rather, by not knowing someone, but I think the advocacy comes from a very different, authentic place if you actually have relationships with those people. So that you're making sure that, and you're validating that you're advocating for the right thing. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And I think it goes back to your earlier point around intentionality.
Yes.
You're not just throwing caution to the wind and just picking up a cast of characters for the sake of doing it. You're really
a cast of characters. Yeah.
Yeah, you're peeling back the layers of the onion, getting to know people for who they really are. That's how people remember things too. It's through the power of other people's stories. Yeah, so I think it makes total sense.
Yeah.
And another thing that comes up too, I guess, along that same vein. So, Tiffany Tavarez Incorporated seems like it's been in business for a long time, and it's really informed what I consider a professional compass and even a personal compass too. So when you think about, as your career has taken shape and as you've enjoyed different experiences throughout your life, what now is your priority from like a social justice and advocacy perspective? Maybe just shed some light on that for the folks in attendance today.
Yeah, no, that's again, a really good question. There are a couple of things that come to mind. Again, to be honest, especially with all that has occurred in 2020, with all of the protests and just, I think I'll just say it, kind of a boom of awareness. There's a term that what I believe to be created, at least, and it was really driving me crazy, which is when I say that people are Columbusing.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, yes, there are a lot of topics, a lot of problems, challenges, knowledge that is new for a lot of people. And I think it's really important that they be truthful and they be curious and creative about how they deal with that information. The challenge I have is that oftentimes the people who find that information to be new assume that it's new for everybody else.
Right.
That absolutely drives me crazy. So for me right now, part of my social justice and personal initiative for Tiffany Tavarez Incorporated is, I know this term is oftentimes overused, but it's also self-care, right? Yeah. And not, I say this just because I'm very, very honest about a lot of things. The number of emails I received of people asking me for book recommendations, right? And there are a couple of things. I'm like, first of all, you still didn't ask how I'm doing. And you asked me to do work for yourself that you have not done yet. Google is free and available to everyone. You don't need to reach out to me for that, right? So I think, to number one, pick and choose when it is that you are going to rely on other people for your personal journey and your responsibility, because others have been in, either experiencing challenges, confronting these type of microaggressions on a regular basis. Does this not mean they become your personal DEI Wikipedia? Yeah. And so right now, part of my my own personal work is making sure I protect myself and my own mental health, and also just setting boundaries for people, because if I don't do that, I can't get upset at them at the end because I didn't set that up for myself.
Yeah, I think you're so spot on too. It's all about managing expectations, and also, I think the greater societal conversation that we're having during this time, where we're having greater awareness for some of the systemic issues that have plagued our country for the longest time and are now finally coming to light. It's really, in some aspects, I think, forcing those of us who identify in underrepresented minority groups to sort of take on this extra role as like your leader, your cultivator, your somebody who's going to point you and your educator in the right direction. And that self-care piece, even what I see across, LinkedIn, various platforms and more, it just shows that having an opportunity to take a step back and really put the ownership back on that person who's seeking that education. I think that's valuable. And just to let you know, we're getting a lot of kudos in the Q&A. No direct questions yet, but everything that you're saying, people are picking up what you're putting down.
I love that. Thank you.
So folks, keep the questions coming in. Would love to hear a couple more. We do have time for some more questions during this discussion. I would love to invite Nicole, Dr. Stokes, on to see if she has any thoughts that she would like to glean or any insights from you, Tiffany. So Dr. Nicole Stokes, do you have any questions from your own perspective?
Thank you, Christian. I'm also giving the kudos as we've gone along. I've taken some copious notes as Tiffany was talking. And just a funny aside, I too have had those moments with a sister in my world. It was Sister Elena. So I can relate very much to what you described. I love that you said God gave me talent, and God did give you talent.
Say it louder for the people in the back. God gave you talent. That's right. Yes.
Yes. But something struck me too, that you in what you shared about that early memory is the idea that often we let people create the narrative for us or shape their perception of our narrative. And that is a thread that can start, unfortunately, in childhood, but continue into even your professional identity. What are some tips beyond what you've learned for yourself, but for others who may be struggling right now in that regard, that a teacher interaction or an interaction with a supervisor? And as you were talking about some of those microaggressions and micro insults that came your way, I had my own tape deck playing of ones that I have received over the years as well. So how do we start to build an armor or a layer of protection that is, feeding on what you said about self-care, but also taking our power back to recreate our own narrative out of the hands of people who don't always have our best interests when they're trying to create a narrative for us?
Oh, that's just so poignant. A couple of things come to mind. I think, it's a little tricky for me, and I understand why you're saying this. And I believe there's a part of me that still, I'll just say, naturally defaults to the thought of armor and protection. But I'm trying to work, I'll be honest, I'm trying to work on getting away from that thinking, because that's still built on the premise that someone else is constantly having a weapon, right?
Fair enough. Yeah.
So, when you think about the acknowledgement of, oh my God, what's my armor? How am I going to protect myself, et cetera? That means you're centering someone else's attack. You're centering someone else's ignorance and kind of proclivity to wanting to seek you out to make you smaller. And I'm not even trying to put any energy towards centering someone else's ignorance like that every day, right? So, when I remember earlier in my career, when I would walk into rooms and either I'd be the youngest woman or the only woman or the only person of color, the only brunette, like whatever makes you different, right? The only one eating, because, a lot of times you put these events and I'm over here like, excuse me, where are the meatballs? That's something. Right. Meatballs, right? I'm hungry all the time. I'm not shy about that. So, and the reason why I bring that up is because when you kind of are like, oh my God, I am the only one, I had to eventually slowly change my mindset to say like, I am a gift to everybody. Yeah. Like people are seeking out like, great, you know what? I'm glad that I'm different. There are 300 people in this room. They're going to remember the only woman in this room, right? So I have to look at the silver lining of what is the thing that's going to make you stand out. And this is really a random, I got stories for days again, but one quick point.
Do it.
Remember in January, thank you. In January 2016, I remember I was going to Madrid, right? And prior to me going to Madrid, it was just for like a vacation, like just some personal leisure time. And I remember I was like, you know what? I do networking all the time, here, like at, in the Philly region, et cetera. I was like, you know what? what if I did networking like overseas when I travel? Like, why can I just randomly contact? Because I used to like just cold email, call people all the time. So I did that. And I actually sent, it was through LinkedIn. You know, I always say like never, like always personalize your LinkedIn invitations. I remember I found through some research, because I'm a big football fan, i.e. soccer, Real Madrid. I used to follow them. So I was like, oh, I'm going to Madrid. I was like, maybe I could just find like who's the head of international sponsorship for Real Madrid and like meet him and like ask him how I can like steal his job one day. Like I legitimately did that. On LinkedIn, I was like, I want to learn about your career. How'd you get there? Et cetera, et cetera. You know, because you know, I need to know whether or not I want to take over your job one day. I'm not kidding. I put it out there just like that. And he agreed to a meeting. I went to Madrid. And I ended up meeting with the head of international sponsorship for Real Madrid. Anyway, we talked for like 2.5 hours. It was great. And he says, you know, I never imagined that someone would just randomly reach out to me like this, et cetera, and be so bold. And, you know, it was almost like I'm impressed, but also how dare you type of tone. And he said, you know, but every time I imagine someone doing that, I never imagined that they would be a woman. And I was like, well, you're welcome. I mean, and here's the thing, he was like, I'm sure people think about it. He's like, tons of people I'm sure think about it, but no one actually does it. So just remember, I tell people all the time, look, every time you decide to not do something, you're making more room for people like me. That's it. It's the only, you know, it's like that kind of, there's, I think it's Mel Robbins, the author, who has like that 5-second rule. Yeah. You can talk yourself out of something in like less than 5 seconds. Right. But I mean, and here's the thing, if you do that to yourself, you can't be mad when your boss, your colleague steps on you all the time and decides that on your behalf. So I have to set the precedent for myself first. I set my standard. That way I can never get offended at other people's lower standards of me. I'm like, girl, please, my standards are way higher for me. So I ain't even bothered about you. So
I love it. Okay. You and I are gonna be starring in our own version of Thelma and Louise with that story. I love it. I love it.
That was really fabulous. We do have one question that did come in from Q&A, and you know, I would love for you to repeat it again if you wouldn't mind, Tiffany. But this was really around the sequence of sentences about consequences of things that ended with creativity is a consequence of freedom. It was almost like towards the end of your discussion, and you were sharing, you know, there are certain consequences for the values that you have, but I'm willing to accept them because it's with my roadmap. Yeah. Can you share a little bit more?
Absolutely. I'm happy to share that. And actually, one thing I was going to even say that even helped me, you know, I know, Nicole, you kind of like joked about like your tell-all book, right? One day in the future. One of the things that helped me, it's almost like very therapeutic. And again, I know this sounds like very, very cliche, which is simply like writing the things down that like bother you, right? So when you think about, let's say, you know, someone that said something that was super offensive to you, and now, you know, you're like, you know, kind of secretly emotionally triggered when a certain word is used, or when someone sits a certain way across from you, like whatever small behavior or language that happens, it's not coming from like a random place. You didn't just wake up one day and all of a sudden are triggered by these things. Oftentimes they are very specific stories that are painful to think about, and oftentimes people don't want to get there. But here's the thing, again, discomfort is only temporary. So like writing it down and actually going through exactly what occurred starts a small process of you owning that. And so when it comes to that section, you know, what I talked about consequence, you know, again, there was always this sense of, if you do XYZ, you're going to end up in jail. If you do XYZ, you're going to end up here. And there was such a reminder all the time, just culturally for me growing up, of all the consequences I would face. And so I was sometimes terrified to move or to do anything. And so I just thought, you know what if, you know, I just change that word for me, so I have a little bit more ownership of the things that I want. So so creativity as a consequence of freedom is definitely one of the things. But I also said, you know, loyalty is a consequence of leadership. And I say that because I've encountered a number of really great people eventually in my career who were fantastic leaders, and I'm so loyal to them. And I'm thinking, oh, that's a consequence of their leadership, my loyalty to them. And the other one, empathy is a consequence of compassion, right? Those who are the most compassionate, you know, they've earned your empathy in a way that others haven't. And again, instead of just saying or kind of dismissing it, or slightly in some ways devaluing it to say, oh, they're just being nice and you just kind of move on. Like, no, really take time to think about not just the negative experiences that shape maybe your limitations, but also, sometimes you want to articulate the things that moved you so you can build upon that and recognize it in others.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I just think, the big takeaway that I certainly gleaned from this conversation today is you really need to know yourself in order to help others activate this communal sense of belonging, this communal sense of togetherness. And really, it goes back to, I think, my roots as a student at St. Joe's, and I'm sure everybody on the phone would agree with this, taking that moment to really reflect and cultivate those experiences. And growth happens when you have perspective, right? Like, something that could have happened many years ago and shaped you, and you look back on it, it could have a totally different, lens and a different experience now that shapes your experience. So I think taking inventory of both the good and bad experiences and trying to reimagine them to identify what values you are trying to shape within your own internal organization helps you identify the causes and the different activities that you're going to pursue personally.
No, absolutely. I think, I think earlier I would be so quick to identify what those experiences are as bad or good, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is that moment, when I was at the long table, when I worked at the foundation, yes, people would say, I can't believe that happened, et cetera. But like, I gleaned a lot from it. I don't know if I would be here in front of you had I not had that moment and be able to, share my stories the way I do if it weren't for that experience. So, can I call it bad? Was it ideal? Absolutely not. Could have it gone better? No. But again, I can't absorb that person's insecurities. Right? I can't absorb the things that they weren't taught or the people they haven't met. I'm not going to take that on. There's already too much burden and things we can't control in our lives. I'm not going to take that on. Yeah. And so, yeah, and for me, especially with that particular one, that was a big one because that was like my first major, full-time job out of graduate school. So that was a doozy, as they say.
I mean, Tiffany, I got to give you a lot of credit. The stories that you shared, again, I mean, really powerful stuff here that we're unlocking. I do hope that we have another opportunity in the near term to do Unlimited Learning 2.0. I think it would be really fabulous and equally insightful to include more along our journey of self-discovery and empowerment when it comes to impacting diversity, equity, inclusion. I would like to now turn it over to Dr. Nicole Stokes, who's going to close out today's session. And Tiffany, thank you again. Real honored to be here with you.
Oh, likewise, Christian. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. This was such an amazing conversation on so many levels. I loved what you just shared about not taking on other people's insecurities and reframing a lot of these experiences. There are many on this call who have probably had some challenging experiences similar to the one that was defining for you. And there was this movie called Sliding Doors. I don't know if anybody remembers it, but it's kind of the quintessential story of if I went left instead of right, how would my life be different, right? And the moments that you described in that long boardroom is what I often call for myself a sliding doors moment. Good or bad, those are moments that define us and select the trajectory, future trajectory that we go on. And if that experience, as you said, hadn't happened to you, you may not be sitting here. And I can think of a number of those in my early career as well that were sliding doors moments of the mic dropping. And we make a decision on the next trajectory where we're going after that experience. So I am so, so grateful that you said yes to another ask. So grateful that you are joining us today and sharing both your professional expertise and your personal story with us today. You are open and your talent and gifts shine through always. Thank you so much, Christian Furler O'Brien, for being the wonderful you and leading our conversation today. And you too say yes to my ask. So thank you so much for that.
All the time. Don't stop asking. We're here to help.
Thank you. I really want to say thank you to our team who have been behind the scenes, our university advancement team, our Department of IT for your partnership and expertise in making all the logistics of today's event happen. Thank you. To everyone who has joined us, our work does not end here today. This conversation does not stop today. We learned a lot of personal narrative. We shared a lot of personal information today, and we have much to process and reflect on. But specifically, I'd like to draw your attention to something that Tiffany said fairly early on, which is the idea that this work, diversity, equity, and inclusion, beyond the buzzwords in the particular moment we're in right now, has to be work that's personal, has to be work that you are invested in. As you said, our commitments often come from our narrative and from our story and the things that shape us into who we are. And so again, I invite you to do the work yourself. Come to our website. We have a ton of information. Sign up for the Center for Inclusion and Diversity newsletter on campus events, trainings, other programs. Oftentimes I hear from folks, there's nothing happening about diversity and inclusion. I go berserk when I hear that, because we're doing stuff every week. So please come to our website and learn more. As always, the Unlimited Learning team will send out a follow-up email to everyone who registered for today's events with additional information. We'll also provide additional resources to learn more and do more. As we close today's session, I want to remind all that a recording of this webinar will be made available shortly after the event. Again, sincere thank you to Tiffany, to Christian, for lending your time, your talents, and your expertise, those God-given talents, by the way, and expertise to today's conversation. And thank you to all of our participants for your time, attention, and for your attendance. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Go and do great things today. In fact, impact people, and please contribute to our greater equity. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, team.